Okay, this is unit 0.1b, just continuing on a little bit. So 0.1b, we talked about linear being a straight line, discrete, and whatnot, but we're going to move on a little bit more. First, we're going to talk about symmetry. First, we have this thing called horizontal symmetry. Horizontal symmetry is if you were to put down a line from left to right, would your graph be symmetric? Or in other words, would one side of the graph look like a mirror image of itself? So an example of that would be this graph here. If we plot this graph, and it looks like this. Okay. Because this line, the x-axis, cuts the graph in half, and it looks exactly identical. They are mirror images of each other. This is an example of horizontal symmetry. Another example would be if we had a graph like so. Okay. And this dotted line I'm drawing shows that this graph is symmetric given a horizontal axis. So that's horizontal symmetry. Vertical symmetry is where the line is a vertical line that cuts the graph in half. So an example of that would be if you have this graph here and you were to have a V-shaped graph and it was cut right down the middle. This is an example of vertical symmetry. If you were to take this paper and you were to fold it along that dotted line, okay, the graph that's here would overlap the graph on the other side. Same thing here. If you were to take this paper and fold it about the axis, the horizontal axis, you would see that these graphs would overlap each other. So that's what it means to be symmetric. Okay. So additionally, we have these things called maximum and minimums. So an absolute maximum is any graph that has one point that is the highest graph ever. This would be the maximum. The highest the graph could go. So this would be like a maximum height, maximum range, maximum speed. It is the highest point on the graph, higher than any other point. Okay. A minimum is similar to that, except it is the lowest point on the graph. There is no other point on the graph that is lowest than this point. That is why it is called the absolute minimum. So an important thing to realize is the only types of graphs that have maximums and minimums are V-shaped graphs and U-shaped graphs. We're going to talk a little bit more about those properties in a later lesson, but it's really important to know that those are the only two types of graphs that have maximums and minimums. The last thing we're going to talk about are piecewise functions. So as the name kind of suggests, it is two or more functions put together as if they were in pieces. So an example of a piecewise function would be like this, where you have a constant function and then all of a sudden it takes off and shoots up. Okay. it's split into two pieces. This would be piece number 1, and this would be piece number 2. You could also have multiple pieces. You could have a piece up here, a piece down here, a piece up here. Okay, 4 different pieces of a linear function. And that's going to do it for unit 0.1b.